The goats were short by 3. Edem counted them twice at dawn, running his hand along the fence line, certain he'd miscounted in the grey half-light. He hadn't. 3 goats, gone from a pen, with no broken latch, no blood, no tracks, leading out. Just fewer goats than the night before, and a silence in the compound that made the hair on his arms rise before his mind caught up to why. 2 nights later, it was not a goat. Untiense, a boy of 9, did not come back from fetching water at the forest stream at dusk. His mother's screaming brought the whole village running with torches, and they searched until the sky turned pale, every path, every clearing, every fallen tree, and found nothing. No footprints leading away, no sign of struggle, just an empty water pot, sitting upright and undisturbed at the water's edge, as if he had simply set it down and stopped existing. By morning, the entire village of Ekemini stood at the edge of the forbidden forest, torches guttering out in the grey light, and no one said a single word. They didn't need to. Every person standing at that tree line already understood, in the oldest part of themselves, exactly what this meant. An old woman broke the silence at last, her voice barely above a whisper. The forest remembers what we owe it.
Listen closely. They know we are here. The forest is watching us.
Nobody argued with her, nobody dared. The crowd dispersed slowly through the morning fog, glancing back over their shoulders at the tree line more than once, as though it might reach out and claim a 4th victim in the space between one glance and the next. By the time the sun had fully cleared the horizon, Ekemini looked, from a distance, like any other quiet farming village, waking to another ordinary day. Smoke rising from cooking fires, goats bleating in their pens, children's voices carrying faintly across the compounds. But underneath that ordinary morning ran a current of dread that hadn't existed 3 days earlier, and everyone in Ekemini could feel it, whether or not they said so aloud. Amara had not slept the night of the search, and it showed. Her closest friend, Mumfon, found her sitting alone at the edge of the compound, well before the sun had fully cleared the trees, hollow-eyed, staring at nothing. "You've been like this since Intiense disappeared," Mumfon said, settling beside her. "You didn't even know him well." "It's not just him." Amara hesitated, then said the thing she rarely let herself say out loud. "Every time someone goes missing near that forest, I think about her, my sister. I think about what it must have been like, being carried in there, and just left." Minfon's face softened, careful. "You can't know what happened to her, Amara." "Nobody does. That's the whole point of the law. It happens, and then it's finished, and no one speaks of it again. That's what frightens me most," Amara said quietly, "that an entire village agreed, generations ago, never to ask what actually happens after." Minfon had no answer for that. Neither, in that moment, did Amara, only the growing uncomfortable certainty that she was going to ask anyway, whatever it cost her. Across the compound, Intiense's mother sat alone outside her doorway, exactly where she had sat every morning since her son's disappearance, staring at the same empty path he used to walk toward the stream. She did not join the gatherings anymore, did not speak much to anyone, simply waited in a grief that had nowhere left to go. Amara watched her from a distance and felt the weight of it settle differently than it had before. Not an abstract village tragedy anymore, but a mother's unanswered waiting, the same waiting her own mother had carried in silence for 17 years. To understand what Ekemini owed the forest, you would have to go back generations, to a law so old that no one living could say who first spoke it, only that it had never once, in all that time, been broken. Ekemini itself, on any ordinary day before all this began, was the kind of village a stranger passing through might call peaceful without a second thought. Mud-walled compounds, strung along winding footpaths, women pounding yam in unhurried rhythm beneath shade trees, children weaving between goats and chickens on their way to chores. The low, constant hum of a community that had built its entire rhythm around routines older than anyone's grandparents. It was, in every visible way, an unremarkable place. Only its oldest law set it apart from any other village along that river, and only its oldest law had ever truly mattered. When twins were born in Ekemini, one child could stay. The other had to be carried into the forbidden forest before the second sunrise, and left there and never spoken of again. No reason was ever given beyond the reason itself. It was the law, and the law kept the village safe, and questioning it was its own kind of danger. Amara had grown up inside that law without ever choosing to. She was the one who was allowed to stay, the phrase used so often in her presence, in hushed voices, that she'd stopped hearing it as unusual by the time she was old enough to understand what it meant. Somewhere in that same forest, carried there as an infant she had no memory of, was a sister whose name Amara had never once been permitted to hear. "Why won't you tell me her name?" Amara asked her mother, Ekaete, on the evening after the search party returned empty-handed. They sat together outside their compound, firelight flickering low between them. The question one Amara had asked 100 times across her whole life and never once received a real answer to. "Because a name is a door," Ekaete said, not looking up from the fire. "And some doors are meant to stay shut. She was my sister. She was the law," Ekaete said, sharper than she meant to, and then softer, almost breaking. "Amara, please. Not tonight. Not with two people already missing."
Why won't you look at me? I need to know what happened that night.
It brings only pain to speak of it.
Amara said nothing more, but something in her, something that had been quietly waiting her whole life for permission, refused, for the first time, to simply accept the silence. The elders convened the next morning beneath the council tree, and Amara stood at the edge of the gathering, close enough to hear everything. Elder Okon spoke first, and loudest, his voice carrying the particular confidence of a man who has never once doubted his own certainty. "The forest's hunger has returned because our devotion has weakened," he declared, sweeping his gaze across the gathered families. "Fewer twins are born to this generation than the last. Fewer offerings made with a whole heart. The law demands faith, and faith has grown thin in Ekemini. We must renew our devotion to the old rites, fully, without hesitation, or this will not stop at goats and children." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, fear looking for something solid to hold on to, and Okon offering exactly that. But Etim, the old record keeper, sat apart from the others, silent, his eyes fixed not on Okon, but on the tree line beyond the village, and Amara noticed it. He alone did not nod along. She felt something small and dangerous stir in her chest, a question she hadn't let herself ask outright until this exact moment. What if it isn't about faith at all? A younger elder, Bassi, spoke up beside Okon, less certain, more troubled. "Forgive me, Okon, but the law has not changed in 100 years. Devotion has not weakened so suddenly that it would explain 3 vanishings inside a single moon. Something is different this time, and I do not think try harder is an answer, only a comfort." Okon's jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting the law itself has failed us, Bassi? That is dangerous talk to speak beneath this tree. I am suggesting we don't yet know enough to speak with such certainty either way," Bassi said, and sat back down, unwilling to press further against Okon's authority, though the doubt in his voice lingered over the gathering long after he'd gone quiet. Etim said nothing at all through the entire exchange, but Amara watched him rise slowly at the meeting's end, watched the careful, deliberate way he avoided every eye on his way back to his hut, like a man carrying something heavy enough that he was afraid it might spill if he moved too quickly. If this story is already giving you chills, wait until you see what's actually waiting in that forest. Subscribe now. because the truth is far worse than anyone in Ekemini imagines. A search party of 6 men entered the forest at first light the next day, torches lit despite the sun, spears in hand, Amara's own uncle, Sunday, among them. The deeper they walked, the quieter the 6 of them grew. The forest's usual noise, birds, insects, the rustle of small game, thinning out to almost nothing, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath around the intruders. "It's too quiet," one of the younger men, Effiong, muttered, gripping his spear tighter. "Even the insects have gone." "Keep walking," Sunday said, though his own voice had lost its earlier confidence. "We turn back the moment we find the stream." They found the stream, and beyond it, signs that made even the bravest among them slow their steps. Broken branches, yes, but arranged, not trampled, laid out almost deliberately, like a message none of them could read. Leaves stripped from one particular tree in a pattern too clean to be animal. "An animal did not do this," Effiong said, backing away a step. "No animal thinks like this." "Then what did?" asked another, and no one answered him, because no one wanted to say the word already forming in all of their minds. Something. They returned before dusk, having found no bodies, no bones, nothing but that unsettling deliberateness. And the village's fear did not lessen. It sharpened. Sunday reported what they'd found to the gathered elders that same evening, his usual steady confidence visibly shaken. "It is not an animal," he said flatly. "Whatever we're dealing with thinks, it arranges, it chooses what to leave behind, as though it wants us to see it and understand something, though none of us could say what. Then we redouble the old rites," Okon said immediately, as though the search party's report only confirmed what he'd already decided before they'd ever left. "Whatever message it intends, our answer remains the same as it has always been." Sunday exchanged a brief, uneasy glance with Bassi, neither man convinced, but neither willing yet to challenge Okon directly in front of the full council. The meeting dispersed with nothing resolved, and the village's unease, rather than easing, simply deepened into something closer to dread. 3 days later, it was a child again, a girl of 6, playing at the edge of her family's yard, while her mother's back was turned for the length of a single breath, gone, as completely and silently as the others. Panic broke fully loose in Ekemini that night. Accusations flew across compounds like sparks off a fire. Someone must have hidden a twin. Someone must have broken the law in secret. Someone's unpunished sin was being visited on the whole village now. Neighbors who had shared meals for years eyed each other with sudden, ugly suspicion. By the following afternoon, the suspicion had a target. A woman named Adiaha, known to have borne twins herself some years back, found her compound, surrounded by a small, tense knot of neighbors, demanding to know, truly know, whether both children had actually been carried into the forest, or whether one had been quietly kept, hidden, raised as a cousin or a niece to spare a mother's grief. "You would accuse me of this," Adiaha said, standing in her doorway, voice trembling with fury and hurt in equal measure. "After I buried that grief so deep, I have not spoken my own daughter's name in 9 years. No one is accusing," one neighbor said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We are only asking. People are disappearing, Adiaha. Everyone's old choices matter now." "My choice was not mine," Adiaha snapped. "It was the law's, as it was for every mother who has ever stood where I stood. If you want someone to blame, look to the law itself, not to the women it has already broken." No one had an answer for that, and the crowd dispersed slowly, uneasily, the accusation unresolved, but the damage to trust already done. Amara, watching from a distance, felt something in her harden further, a growing conviction that the law itself, not any hidden sin, was the true wound this village kept refusing to look at directly. Amara, unable to sleep, found her mother awake as well, sitting rigid by the dead fire, and asked the question she had never once dared voice aloud in her entire life. Was she truly given to the forest, my sister, or did something else happen that no one will admit? Ekate's face did something Amara had never seen it do before. A flicker of pure, naked fear, gone almost as fast as it appeared, replaced by a mask of composed denial that came a half-second too late to be believed. She was given to the forest, Ekate said, as the law requires, as it has always required. You're lying to me. Go to bed, Amara. Every single time I ask you about her, you go still first, and then you answer, Amara pressed, her own voice shaking now. You've done it my whole life. I used to think it was grief. Now I'm not so sure it isn't something closer to guilt. Do not speak to me of guilt, Ekaete said, sharper than Amara had ever heard her, before catching herself, pressing a hand hard against her own mouth, as though to physically stop more from spilling out. When she spoke again, her voice had gone smaller, older. You do not know what that morning cost me. You cannot know. And I will not relive it simply because you have decided, tonight of all nights, that you finally deserve an answer. I don't want to relive your pain, mother. I want to know if my sister is alive. Ekakete said nothing at all, and the silence stretched long enough that Amara finally rose and walked away, more unsettled by what her mother hadn't said than by anything she had. Amara did not go to bed. She sat outside, long after her mother had gone in, staring at the black tree line under a thin moon, and that was when she saw it. A shape at the edge of the forest, upright, human, still, watching her and only her, unmoving, even as her breath caught in her throat. She blinked and it was gone. She told no one what she'd seen, but she knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that she would go back to that tree line again. She went back the very next night and found nothing, only the ordinary dark of an ordinary forest edge, no shape, no signs, no trail. She told herself it had been exhaustion, grief playing tricks on tired eyes, and almost believed it until she noticed, just before turning back, a single freshly broken branch pointing deliberately down a path she hadn't taken. Not tonight then, but soon. Dimphon caught her slipping back into the compound before dawn, and for a moment, Amara braced for questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, Mphon simply studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once, quietly, as though some private decision had been made. Whatever you're doing, Mphon said, I won't ask. But if anyone comes looking for you before sunrise, I'll say you were with me. Just come back every time. Promise me that much. I promise, Amara said, grateful beyond words that she didn't have to explain what she couldn't yet explain to herself. She went back a third night, and this time, the trail was waiting for her from the very first step. She followed it until the trees opened into a small hollow, moonlight breaking through the canopy in pale shafts, and there, crouched at the hollow's far edge, was a figure. Human-shaped, feral, scarred along one forearm, hair matted and wild, clothed in rough bark cloth that looked woven by hand, out of necessity rather than skill. The figure turned toward her, and Amara's whole body went cold. It was her own face looking back at her. Not similar, not familiar, identical, the same eyes, the same jaw, aged by years of a life Amara could not imagine, but unmistakably, impossibly, her mirror image. Amara couldn't finish the sentence. Her voice had abandoned her entirely. The figure, her sister, her actual living sister, stared back at her with an expression caught somewhere between terror and desperate hope, mouth opening and closing around sounds that weren't quite words, a language half forgotten from years of having no one to speak it to. You're alive, Amara finally managed, tears coming without permission. All this time, you're alive. Her sister took one halting step forward, reaching out a scarred hand, flinching when Amara reached back, then forcing herself to hold still and let their fingers touch. The first contact either of them had had with a twin they'd been told their whole lives to forget. For a long moment, neither of them moved, both of them simply staring at a face that was their own, and yet a stranger's. 17 years of separation, collapsing into a single held breath. "What's your name?" Amara whispered. "They never told me your name. They never let me ask." Her sister opened her mouth, and what came out was broken, halting, more sound than word, an answer attempted and lost. The shape of a name she herself might not fully remember anymore, worn away by years, without anyone to speak it to her. "It's all right," Amara said, throat tight. "It's all right. We'll find it again. I promise you, we'll find it again." Her gaze fell to the scar along her sister's forearm, old and deep, clearly healed wrong for want of proper care. What happened here? Her sister looked down at it as though seeing it fresh, then simply said, "Surviving." The single word carrying more history than either of them could unpack in the time they had left together that night. A distant sound cracked through the trees, and her sister flinched violently, fear flooding her face all at once. She grabbed Amara's wrist, urgent, desperate, trying to force words out that kept breaking apart before they fully formed. A warning, Amara understood instantly, though she couldn't yet understand what about. "Wait, tell me what's wrong, tell me what's out there." But her sister was already gone, bolting back into the dark trees faster than Amara could follow, leaving her alone in the hollow with her heart hammering and a single, horrifying realization settling over her. If her sister is alive, then what has actually been taking the missing villagers, like this video right now? If that reveal just hit you the way it hit Amara, and comment the one question you need answered most, because the real threat in this forest hasn't even shown itself yet. Amara did not sleep that night, or the next. She went instead, in secret, to the one person in Ekemini who might actually know the truth, buried beneath the lore everyone recited, but no one questioned. Etim, the old record keeper, the village had long since stopped consulting, dismissed by most as too old to remember anything properly. She found him exactly where she expected, seated outside his hut, as though he had been waiting, perhaps for years, for someone to finally walk up and ask the right question. "You already know something," Amara said, without preamble. "I saw it on your face, at the council tree." Everyone else believed Elder Okon. You didn't. Etim studied her for a long moment before he spoke, his voice low and careful, as if the words themselves were dangerous to say aloud. "How much do you want to know, child?" I ask honestly. "Some knowledge, once given, cannot be given back. All of it. I need all of it." He nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing less, and gestured for her to sit. The law was never a punishment for twins, child, and it was never truly an offering to appease a hungry curse, no matter what Okon tells the frightened. Generations ago, something was sealed within that forest. Something old. Something that feeds not on flesh, but on fear itself, on grief, on the particular anguish of a family forced to give up what they love most. Then why the twins? Why the forest law at all? Because that grief, repeated faithfully across every generation, without fail, was never a sacrifice to the thing in the forest, Etim said. It was the seal that kept it dormant, a terrible, cruel, unknowing kind of containment. And as fewer families have upheld it fully, as faith has thinned and resentment has grown, that seal has weakened with it. Who decided this? Who first agreed that tearing children from their families was an acceptable price to keep something asleep? Etim's face creased with old, tired grief. I do not know, child. The record I inherited was already old when it came to me. The reasoning behind it already lost to time. There is only one fragment passed down, word for word, across every keeper before me. That the thing in the forest was not always sealed. That once, long ago, it walked freely among the first families of this land, feeding openly on whatever grief it could find. until those families discovered, by accident, more than design, that a child kept whole beside its twin seemed somehow to starve it. And so a terrible logic was born from that accident. If wholeness starved it, separation, deliberately repeated, might be made to serve as a permanent leash instead. No one ever asked whether there was a kinder leash to be found. They only found one that worked, and called it law, and let it harden into something no one questioned again. That's not justice, Amara said. That's just the first cruelty that happened to succeed. Yes, Etim said simply. I have thought the very same thing, more nights than I can count, and said it to no one until tonight. I have kept this truth for 40 years, telling myself that revealing it without a solution would only unravel the one thing holding the danger back. I convinced myself that silence was a kind of mercy. He looked at her directly now, ashamed. I see now, it may have simply been cowardice, dressed up as wisdom. Amara felt the floor of her understanding shift entirely. My sister isn't the danger in that forest. No, child, I don't believe she ever was. Then she's been alone in there for years, with the actual thing the ritual was built to contain. Etim's silence and the grief in his old eyes was answer enough. She's not hunting the village, Amara whispered, horror dawning fully now. She's been trying to hold it back, by herself, this whole time. She rose, fists clenched, fury and grief tangled together in her chest. And everyone let a child do that alone, for 17 years, because it was easier than asking a single honest question. Yes, Etim said quietly, I am one of the everyone, Amara. I have no defense to offer you. She left without another word, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't be cruel, and because she already knew exactly what she had to do next. She simply didn't yet know if the village would survive the truth once she told it. She returned to the hollow that night, needing to see her sister again before deciding anything further, and found her waiting, calmer this time, less startled by Amara's presence. Idara, though neither of them knew her name yet, led Amara deeper into the trees than she'd gone before, to a place where the bark of every surrounding tree had been scratched with the same repeating mark, over and over, layers upon layers of the same desperate symbol, carved fresh again each time the old scratches faded. Holding, Idara managed, touching the marks gently as though they were something sacred. Holding it, every day, Amara pressed her palm flat against the scarred bark, feeling the sheer, exhausting repetition of it. Years of a single, unthanked vigilance, carried by a child the village had discarded, and then simply forgotten to wonder about. You've been protecting them, Amara said, voice breaking, and they've been afraid of you the entire time. Idara's expression didn't hold anger at that, only a tired, ancient kind of sorrow, the particular grief of someone who had stopped expecting fairness a long time ago and simply kept doing the necessary thing anyway. A low sound rolled through the trees just then, not quite a growl, not quite a groan, more like the forest itself, exhaling something old and hungry, and Idara's whole body went rigid, pulling Amara back toward the path with sudden urgency. Go, she said. Not safe, not tonight. Amara went, but she carried the sound with her all the way home, and she understood, with growing dread, that whatever slept beneath Ekemini's oldest fear was not sleeping much longer. Menfon found her sitting alone by the river that evening, knees drawn to her chest, and sat beside her without a word for a long while before finally speaking. You've decided something, my phone said. I can always tell. You go quiet in a particular way. If I tell the village what I know, they may kill her before they ever understand what she's actually done for them, Amara said. And if I say nothing, more people vanish, and eventually, someone else finds her in that forest and decides on their own that she's the monster, without anyone left to tell them otherwise. Then, there's no safe choice left. only which cost you're willing to carry. I'm so tired of choices that only ever have a cost, Amara said, and for the first time since this had all begun, she allowed herself to cry, not for her sister alone now, but for every mother, every stolen name, every generation that had quietly accepted a wound as a law. Yemfon put an arm around her and said nothing further because there was nothing left to say that would make the choice any lighter. The third disappearance came in broad daylight, inside the village itself, and it changed everything. A young woman named Idara, no relation to Amara's sister, simply a name the village would soon associate with terror regardless, vanished from her own compound at midday, in full sunlight, with 3 witnesses present, who all told the same impossible story. One moment she was there, and then, without sound, without struggle, she simply was not. I was looking right at her, her sister-in-law kept repeating to anyone who would listen, hands shaking uncontrollably. I was looking right at her, and then I was looking at the space where she had been standing, and there was nothing between those 2 moments. No sound, no scream, nothing. You must have looked away, someone suggested, desperate for an explanation that made ordinary sense. I did not look away, she said, and something in the flat certainty of her voice silenced the room entirely. Whatever moved in that forest was no longer staying within it. Something was accelerating. In the days leading up to it, smaller signs had already begun accumulating, though no one had yet connected them into a single warning. Dogs across the village refused to settle at night, pacing and whining at compound gates for no visible reason. Birds abandoned the trees nearest the forest's edge entirely, their usual dawn chorus thinning to an unsettling near silence. A well near the southern boundary ran suddenly cloudy for 2 days, clearing again with no explanation anyone could offer. Small things, easy to dismiss individually, impossible to ignore once Idara's warning finally made sense in hindsight. That evening, as panic curdled into open hysteria, someone at the tree line spotted a figure watching from the shadows. Amara's sister, drawn perhaps by the same pull that had led Amara to her, or perhaps simply hungry for a glimpse of the world she'd been torn from as an infant. Whatever her reason, the village saw only a wild, scarred stranger who looked exactly like one of their own, appearing at the exact edge of the exact forest where their people kept disappearing. "The cursed child," someone shouted, and the word spread through the gathering crowd like fire through dry grass. "She's come back for revenge. She's the one taking our people. I always said the law existed for a reason," an older woman called out, voice shaking with fear more than certainty. Now look what's come for us. "She has my daughter's face," another villager whispered to no one in particular, staring at Idara in horrified recognition of a family resemblance he couldn't otherwise explain. Unaware of how close to the truth his confusion had actually landed. "Burn the tree line," a man near the front shouted, panic overtaking reason entirely. "Drive it out before it takes another child." A mob began to form, with terrifying speed, torches raised, voices rising into a single furious chant. Elder Okon, at its front, his voice the loudest of all, feeding the fear rather than calming it. Because fear, Amara now understood with sick clarity, was exactly what kept men like him in power. At the tree line, Idara froze, torn between fleeing back into the only home she'd ever known, and some deeper, more stubborn instinct that kept her rooted in place, watching the approaching torches with an expression Amara recognized instantly, because she had worn it herself, only nights before in that same forest. The particular fear of someone who has been abandoned once already, and is now watching it threaten to happen again, this time with fire. Mifon found Amara in the crush of the crowd, gripping her arm hard. "Amara, whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. Look at them. They'll tear apart anything that looks like an answer right now, guilty or not. Then, I have to give them the truth instead," Amara said, "before they destroy an innocent life for the crime of simply existing." Amara stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, faced with an impossible choice. Stay silent and let the sister she had known for only a handful of desperate minutes be torn apart as a scapegoat for a danger she'd spent her whole life fighting alone. Or step forward and reveal everything, the truth about the ritual, the real threat sleeping beneath centuries of misplaced fear, and her own secret meetings in that forbidden forest, and risk being cast out, exactly as her sister once was, by the very people she'd grown up trusting. She stepped forward. Stop. Amara's voice cracked across the gathered crowd, and for one startled moment, everyone actually did. She is not your curse. She is my sister, my twin, and she has been alone in that forest since the day she was taken from our mother's arms, fighting something none of you have ever had the courage to understand. The crowd's fury didn't vanish. It simply redirected, hot and sudden, toward Amara herself. If you thought the mob turning on an innocent woman was the worst this village could do, wait until you see who they turn on next. Hit subscribe now, because Amara is about to lose everything for telling the truth, and what happens after will break your heart. You knew, her mother said, stricken, stepping through the crowd toward her, voice trembling somewhere between fury and devastation. You've been going into that forest, meeting her, and you said nothing. I said nothing because I was trying to understand what was actually happening before I destroyed everything you built your whole life protecting. Amara shot back, tears finally breaking loose. The law isn't protecting us, Mother. It never was. It was the only thing holding something far worse asleep, and it's been unraveling for years, because everyone in this village has been too afraid to ask a single honest question about why. That's not. Ekaete's voice broke entirely. That cannot be true. Ask Etim. He's known the whole time. Ask Elder Okon why he spent every single meeting since these disappearances began pushing devotion and blame instead of truth. Ask him what he actually knows and why he's buried it. All eyes turned to Okon, whose composed authority cracked for just a moment. One unguarded flicker of a man caught holding a secret far larger than he'd ever intended to carry alone, before he masked it again, too late for everyone watching to unsee it. She lies to save the cursed child, Okon said, but his voice had lost its earlier certainty, and the crowd, for the first time, hesitated. Tell them why, Okon, Etim said, quietly, stepping forward from the edge of the crowd, his old voice carrying further than anyone expected. Tell them why you have pushed devotion over truth since the day these disappearances began. Tell them what your own father told you, the year you inherited his seat beneath that council tree. Okon's composure finally broke entirely, because the law is the only thing that has ever kept this village from tearing itself apart with fear. He shouted, more confession than defense, because a village that believes it has an answer, however terrible, survives. A village that knows the truth, that the danger was always inside our own borders, fed by our own grief. That village turns on itself far faster than any forest ever could. I did not create this cruelty. I only kept it from collapsing into something worse. You kept it, Ekate said, quiet and devastating, because questioning it would have cost you the only power you have ever held. Do not dress your fear up as protection, Okon. I have worn that same lie myself, and I will not wear it a moment longer. Ekaete stood between her daughter and the mob, something breaking open in her that had been sealed shut for 17 years. I never wanted to give her up, she said, quiet at first, then louder, forcing the words out like a wound finally lanced. Do you understand that? I never wanted to. I was made to believe there was no other choice, that refusing would doom this entire village, and I have carried that grief every single day since, and I will not let this village take another daughter from me out of the same blind fear that took the first one. The crowd's chant faltered into uncertain, murmuring silence. And that was the exact moment the ground beneath the forest's tree line began, for the first time, to visibly darken. Not with shadow, but with something deeper, something spreading, as though the earth itself were beginning to unmake. What emerged from the forest that night was not shaped like fear, the way old stories always described it. It was shaped like absence, a rippling wrongness in the air, where trees and light simply ceased to hold their proper form, growing more solid, more present, with every panicked scream and every accusation still hanging in the air from the mob only moments before. Where it passed, grass did not bend so much as forget it had ever been grass, flattening into pale, colorless ground that no living thing would touch again. The air around it carried no sound at all, a pocket of dead silence dragging behind it like a wound. It had no true face, only a suggestion of one, shifting each time someone looked directly at it into whatever their own fear expected to see. It fed on exactly that: blame, terror, the particular poisonous energy of a crowd turning on its own. The villagers scattered screaming in every direction, torches falling forgotten into the dirt, and for a moment, it seemed the entire crisis would simply collapse into chaos beyond anyone's control. Amara's sister emerged from the tree line at a dead run, placing herself instantly between the entity and the terrified villagers, and for the first time, the people of Ekemini saw clearly what she had actually been doing in that forest all these years, not hunting them, but holding a line none of them had ever known existed. Amara ran to her side without hesitation, and the two sisters stood together, truly together, for the first time since they were separated as infants. "I don't know how to stop it," Amara said, breathless, watching the entity's rippling edges grow wider, hungrier, a cold wind rising around them that smelled faintly of turned earth and old grief. Her sister, the sister Amara still had no name for, grabbed her hand, hard, and in that single unbroken contact, something between them steadied, some old and ancient logic clicking into place that neither of them had words for, but both of them somehow understood at once. Together, her sister managed. The word rough and broken, but entirely clear. The first full word Amara had ever heard her speak. Not apart. That's what it wants. Apart. Understanding crashed over Amara all at once. The ritual had never truly needed sacrifice. It needed grief, yes, but grief born specifically from tearing two people apart who belonged together. The forest didn't hunger for abandonment because abandonment was holy. It hungered because separation, generation after generation, was the wound that kept it fed and dormant at once. A horrifying, self-perpetuating cruelty, mistaken for protection. The entity surged toward them, and both sisters held their ground, hands locked together, refusing the one thing 17 years of law had trained an entire village to do without question. "The law isn't the seal," Amara shouted to the crowd, to her mother, to Etim, to everyone still frozen at the tree line. "Breaking it is. Reunion is what actually closes this. Not another child lost to that forest. Not ever again." Ekate was the one who stepped forward first, out of the entire terrified crowd, walking directly toward the rippling dark, with a courage born entirely out of 17 years of buried grief, finally given somewhere to go. "I take back what I gave," she said, voice shaking but unbroken, addressing the forest itself as though it could hear her, as though it needed to hear her. "I take back what this village has taken, generation after generation, out of fear, dressed up as devotion. No more children lost to this darkness. No more mothers made to choose. The law ends here, tonight, with me." Other villagers began to move then, one after another, stepping forward beside her, not toward the entity, but toward each other, closing the physical distance the mob's fury had opened only minutes before, undoing separation with simple, deliberate proximity. Adiaha was among them, moving to stand beside the very neighbors who had accused her only days earlier, reaching out and taking the hand of the woman who had led that accusation, both of them weeping, both of them choosing, in that single, unglamorous gesture, to stop the oldest habit this village had ever practiced without question. Effiong, who had run from the forest with the search party days before, pulled his younger brother close against his side, refusing, for once, to let fear stand between them. One by one, all across the gathered crowd, hands found other hands, distance collapsing into unbroken lines of people, simply choosing not to be apart. The entity shrieked, a sound like 100 years of grief being forced back into a single moment, and began to collapse in on itself, the rippling wrongness folding inward, unable to feed on unity the way it had gorged on fracture and blame. The dead, pale ground it had left in its wake began, slowly, to green again at the edges, ordinary grass, creeping back over the scar it had cut into the earth. The unnatural silence broke apart into the village's own restored sound, weeping, murmuring, someone somewhere beginning, absurdly and beautifully, to laugh with relief. The wrongness that had swallowed the tree line's usual night sounds released its hold, and crickets, disturbed and hesitant at first, slowly began to sing again. Elder Okon alone did not move forward. Cornered by the crowd's sudden, unified attention and the entity's collapsing fury both at once, he made one last desperate attempt to flee toward the safety of the village, and the entity's final, dying pull caught him instead, dragging him backward into the dark with a scream that cut off entirely too fast. The price the village had nearly demanded of an innocent woman, claimed instead by the very fear he'd spent the whole crisis feeding. Then silence. Complete, ordinary, blessed silence. The tree line empty and still, under a moon that suddenly looked exactly like moonlight again. Nothing more. No one spoke for a long while after. The village stood together at the tree line, hands still loosely joined, as though afraid that letting go too quickly might undo whatever had just been won. It was Etim who finally broke the silence, stepping into the open, where the whole village could see him, his old voice carrying none of its usual careful restraint. "I kept this truth buried for 40 years, he said, believing silence was wisdom. It was not. It was fear, wearing an old man's patience as a disguise. I am sorry to Idara most of all, but to every one of you who was made to fear something that only ever wanted to be understood. No one moved to punish him. Grief, freely admitted, asked for something other than punishment, and the village seemed, for the first time in generations, to understand the difference." Bassi stepped up beside him, quiet but resolute. "From tonight, no law in Ekemini stands unquestioned again. Not because questioning is disrespect, but because silence very nearly cost us everything we claim to protect." The elders remaining did not argue with him. There was, after everything, no argument left worth making. Etim spent the following months doing something he had never once done in 40 years as record keeper, inviting anyone who wished it to sit with him and hear the village's full history, unedited, including every uncomfortable truth he had once judged too dangerous to share. He was, by the villagers' own account, a different man for it, lighter, somehow, as though confession had finally set down a weight he'd carried since long before Amara was even born. In the days that followed, the elders of Ekemini formally abolished the law that had shaped and scarred the village for longer than anyone could accurately remember. No more children would be carried into that forest. No more names erased before they were ever fully spoken. Amara's sister was welcomed into the village for the first time in her entire life, haltingly at first, relearning a language, a home, a family she had only ever known from a hollow in the trees, but welcomed nonetheless, fully, without condition. The relearning was not easy, and the narration does not pretend it was. She flinched at crowded gatherings for weeks, more comfortable at the compound's edge than its center. She struggled with foods she'd never eaten, customs she'd never been taught, faces that looked at her with equal parts wonder and lingering unease. Wemphon, of all people, was the one who sat with her patiently each evening, teaching her words slowly, one at a time, never rushing, until halting sound gradually became halting sentences. It was Mijeka, Chu, finally, who gave her the name she should have carried since birth. A name chosen 17 years too late, and spoken now with all the love that had been forced into silence for every single one of those years. Idara, she said, holding both her daughter's hands at once, tears streaming freely down a face that had spent nearly 2 decades not allowing itself to grieve properly. It means kindness. It's who you were always going to be, if the world had simply let you. Idara didn't have the words yet to answer fully. She only nodded and let herself, for the first time, be held. Bassi, the young elder who had once dared to voice doubt beneath the council tree and been silenced for it, was among the first to formally welcome Idara into the village council's protection, publicly naming what Okon's fall had made undeniable, that questioning an old fear out loud was not disloyalty, but the beginning of actual wisdom. Months later, the village gathered again at the edge of the forest at dawn, the same tree line where this had all begun, torches guttering the same way they had that first terrible morning. But this time, no one stared into the dark with dread. Amara and Idara stood together at the very front of the gathered crowd, twin sisters, finally, fully, undivided, and the forest beyond them looked, for the first time in living memory, like nothing more than an ordinary forest. Idara spoke more easily now, though never quite as fluently as Amara, and on that particular morning, standing at the tree line with the whole rebuilt village around her, she found the words for something she'd been trying to say for weeks. "Not cursed," she said, quietly, looking out at the ordinary trees, sunlight beginning to filter gold between their branches. Never cursed, only left alone too long. Amara took her sister's hand, the same way she had the night everything changed. "Not anymore," she said. "Never again." A fear inherited without question can blind a people to the real danger standing right behind it. And sometimes, the only thing strong enough to break a curse built on separation is simply two people who refuse, finally, to be torn apart. Ekemini had spent generations mistaking its own wound for its protection, mistaking silence for wisdom, mistaking a mother's grief for something owed rather than something stolen. It took a single question, asked out loud by one girl, unwilling to accept an answer she'd never actually been given, to unravel a fear that had outlived everyone who first agreed to carry it. If this story kept you glued until the very last second, don't let it end here. Subscribe, drop a comment telling us what you'd have done in Amara's place, and hit that like button so more stories like this find their way to you. Because in Ekemini, they no longer tell this one as a warning, they tell it as the day the fear finally ended.